Welcome everybody to video number 2 in this orientation program. The topic of this video is the dynamics of bias, prejudice, and racism. To lead us in this conversation, I am honored to be joined by two wonderful colleagues of mine, and I'm going to invite them to introduce themselves, to tell us a little bit of who they are, and a little bit about the work that they do here on campus. So Emjali, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Emjali Mendoza-Waters. I work in the Office of Campus Ministry. I am the Associate Director of the office, and in particular, I run the service and justice programs at the university. I'm also a Catholic U alum from a million years ago, and I've been working at the university. I am on my 18th academic year. So I have been at the university for just about as long as you've been alive. Which makes me really old. My family, my husband's also a Catholic U alum. My kids have been raised by Catholic U, so Catholic U is a home to me. And so that's just a little bit of background. I'm from Southern California, and I came to Washington, D.C. to study politics and philosophy. I wanted to be a politician, and obviously I'm a campus minister, so that worked out really well. My master's degree is in social work and social justice, social change, also from Catholic University.
Thank you. Reka?
Sure. So I'm Dr. Reka Vergas. I was born and raised in Singapore and spent both my undergrad and grad school years in Washington, D.C. I'm one of the staff psychologists at the Counseling Center here at Catholic U. I've also been the director of outreach here for the past 2 years and will soon be moving into the role of director of externship training. And in 2015, I myself was actually an extern at the Counseling Center, so it's a real privilege to be coming back full circle in this role here at Catholic U.
Awesome, thank you. Well, these are two of the great people that make our campus unique, so I'm very excited to be joined by both of you. And again, my name is Javier Bustamante. I'm the director of the Center for Cultural Engagement here at Catholic. So let's, before we jump into our conversation and I ask questions of my guests here, I just want to bring some definitions about bias, prejudice, and racism. So we know that bias is a prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group. So you know, it's a preference in some ways, right? We can think of it as such. You know, so we all have biases. So we have biases for music, for foods, for different things. And so we also have biases for people sometimes, right? And so we'll talk a little bit about how our brain makes those decisions, but it's important for us to know that we all have biases, right? In the same way, we all have prejudices, right? And a prejudice is a preconceived opinion about a group of people. And so this happens a lot. You know, before we meet somebody from a different group, we have ideas about who they are. You know, to be transparent here, I was born in Peru, and I had my prejudices about people in the United States. So before I came to the United States, I had these ideas of what people in the United States were like. And then I came here. Those prejudices were, you know, challenged in so many ways. And growing up and, you know, continue to have more prejudices because of the information that I was receiving as I was growing up as well. So bias, prejudice, those are like normal things that we all have. And so we need to be conscious of that. Racism is a bigger issue. And so the definition that we have here, it's a prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism direct against a person or a group of people on the basis of their membership of a particular racial or ethnic group. And, you know, there's a lot to unpack on racism, but what we need to understand is that it's a problem and it's an issue that we can't ignore. You know, we've all been alive this summer, and we know it's, you know, more than ever, it's in front of us. So we have to take the steps to confront racism, not just in ourselves and some of the attitudes that we might have personally, but also racist systems, you know, that have actually been part of our society, part of our country, and sometimes our institutions. So we need to be aware of that and have the agency to be able to change those things. So how does bias works? I just want to share of how our brain works a little bit. So one of the things that we need to know is that our brain is a very powerful organ, right? It's a very powerful machine. And our brain, it's designed to think through things without us not even knowing it, right? Because our brain, shares information or, sends all this information within itself at such a fast speed. And our body sends information to our brain, like right here, when we look at it, it says the human body sends 11 million bits per second of information to the brain for processing, right? So we think of our brain as like a computer, all this information is being sent and brain is processing all of it, but we're only conscious of a very tiny fraction of it. So, like you're all sitting down, you're all listening to us here, but your brain is doing so many other things, like, looking out for noises or, listening to your body as it gets hungry and going in different directions. And sometimes we're not even conscious that our brain is doing all of that. And so that's how our biases, our prejudices are formed, because our brain will make these decisions for us based on experiences that we've had, based on information that we've had and we've received previously. And so that comes out normally as a normal process of who we are as human beings. So, I guess in some ways we just have to be patient with ourselves, and recognizing that, our biases, our prejudices are sort of a part of a normal process. And so one of the things that we have to do, I think, is we have to start retraining our brain not to go on autopilot, especially when we start realizing that our biases and prejudice are kind of coming through. So we'll talk a little bit more about this in the coming slides, and I have some questions for my colleagues here to help us unpack this a little bit. So I want to ask this first question to you ladies, if you could share about a personal experience with bias and prejudice. Like I said, I had a lot of prejudices about people in the United States before coming here. A lot of it changed when I came here. So I don't know if you've had some experiences that you can talk about, personal things that either happened to you or, of how you grew in some way as well, to recognize these things within yourself. So I don't know, Reka, would you like to go first?
Sure. So one example that comes to mind is when I first came to the US for college. I made my first group of friends during the international student orientation, and that happens before the NSO. So later, as I met local folks, they would make jokes about the foreign kids, and this is in quotes, the foreign kids, they seemed to be surprised that I continued to maintain friendships with them because I didn't have an accent. So this immediately communicated to me that I would be seen as less than somehow if I had an accent, or sort of more frequently reminded people of my otherness. And so this, really showed to me the power of prejudice is so insidious that although I originally didn't necessarily hold prejudice against folks with accents, it was apparent to me that for academic, professional, social reasons, it's important in this country to abide by the norms of the majority. And now, even more than a decade later, I still sometimes struggle with decisions about whether focusing on issues impacting people of color, international students, or other oppressed groups will put me back into that box of, well, she's dealing with minority stuff because she's a minority as well. But thinking about it now, this also shows the privilege that I have in basically in passing in some situations. So that's my responsibility to represent minorities who the system would otherwise overlook or push down because of their prejudice.
Thank you. Anjali?
I have to say, in this past, obviously this summer, I've been doing so much more thinking about my identity and my experiences, which I think is a great thing. I'm from Southern California. My parents were born and raised in the Philippines. They immigrated in the late 70s. So I'm first generation American. And so I grew up in a very Filipino household where that the language was spoken in my house. My grandparents lived with us. And so just kind of forging this growing up experience of living in the United States. Well, I was born in the United States, but having a very household that was had very traditional Filipino values. And so when I think about experience of bias and prejudice, being from Southern California, it was very diverse. So I had friends of different backgrounds and ethnicities and races. And so when I came from Southern California to Washington, D.C., to the Catholic University of America, it was the majority of the students were white. And all of a sudden, I was different. Whereas when I was at home in California, and we just had so many blendings of cultures, and it was something that I didn't really think about, to be honest. And it wasn't until I came to the East Coast that people would call me, "Oh, you're so exotic looking." And I think it had to do a lot with my physical presence and the way I looked. People would come up to say, "You look so exotic." And I'm like, nobody ever used to comment on the way I looked when I was at home, because I looked probably more like everybody else. And so I think about those experiences, or when I was dating, somebody would say, oh, they would tell their family member, oh, the person I'm dating is not white. And oh, what are they? They're Filipino. And that would come back to me. I'm thinking, wow, someone actually had to describe me and kind of put a disclaimer or a statement to say that they're not white. And so I think those are kind of those moments that I've had the opportunity in the last couple months to really kind of dig a little bit deeper and kind of think, where have I experienced? And they've been in mostly subtle ways, which I think is even more important for this conversation as we kind of figure out, how am I a part of this? It's in the subtleties that were not so overly striking, but over time and in the small subtleties really have an impact. And so I think the ways in which I kind of reflect on that is, how have those moments kind of shaped who I am now? How is my family and my background and my really embracing my own culture really impacting how I view bias and prejudice? And I have my own, so I really appreciated the brain. My brain has been kind of conditioned a certain way based on my education, based on my family. And so even some of the things that my parents would say, like, be careful you're in the city, you're in Washington, D.C., that came with some other added implications. It wasn't that I just moved from the suburbs and across the country into a very urban setting. It had other implications that my brain wasn't totally processing in that way, but came with how I am cautious in the city and being a woman and how I would present myself. And so I think those are some personal experiences that I've had, and I would say it's coming from a very diverse culture, and then coming to a community, or coming to an area that was predominantly white, and so how those experiences have impacted me.
Wow, lots of great stuff right there. Thank you. That's great. So let's, I want to switch gears a little bit and want to introduce Father Jude, who's the chaplain of our campus ministry, chaplain of our university. And Father Jude has a definition that he wants to share with us about racism. So let's take a quick listen in. Here we go.
Racism is a sin because it ignores God's commandment that we are all his children and that we need to love one another as he has loved us.
So I just wanted to share that in this definition of racism as being a sin, right? That's for us, people of faith, our understanding of racism not just being an issue that is negative and that, gets in the way of relationships, but really it's also offensive to God, right? So as we're thinking of racism and these issues that affect us, why do you think we need to confront racism in our communities, particularly here on our campus, and within our society at large? So just kind of, following up on Father's point, as this being a broad problem, that it's not just about us, it's about our relationships, it's about our relationship with God and our relationship with others. Yeah, who'd like to go first?
I will. And I'm a campus minister. Father Jude is my boss, and so and in a faith lens, as Christians, of just really looking at, are we in true solidarity with our brothers and sisters? Am I my brother and sister's keeper? Do I belong to one another? And so I think it goes back to this fundamental relationship of, do I actually know and care and love you? And I think we put up these barriers in regards to, I don't know you. I'm okay in my bubble, but I don't know you. And that creates this divide, which can add these layers of bias, prejudice, and racism. And so I think when I think about fundamentally, about the gospel, and I'm honestly, in the last couple months, my faith is something in the gospels, and thinking about Jesus has been a place where I can find consolation. I'm like, okay, where was Jesus going? Who was Jesus speaking to? He was speaking to all people. He was speaking to Gentiles, Samaritans. He was speaking to the Pharisees. He's speaking to all these different people. And so I think, okay, would Jesus not talk to someone because of their color or their race? And so I come back to this very fundamental call as a Christian of, how do we love one another? How do I love one another as we would love ourselves? And do I have that capacity? And so I think that the need to confront racism in our communities, if we're coming from a place of faith, is to return to the faith of the Gospels, to return to the faith of, what is this shared solidarity and this recognition of dignity in the other? And I think when we have racism, we don't recognize the dignity and worth in the other person. You are less than me. I am better than you. And so I think in order for us to have a community that's rooted in respect and love is to start in recognizing the dignity and worth of the other person. And I might not have the opportunity to encounter all types of people, but what can I do to learn? And I know we'll talk later about what can I do, but I really do think it's, why do we need to come back to a fundamental of recognizing the dignity and worth in people. And for me, that comes from a place of faith and seeing Jesus as an example of, in a very concrete way, how I saw him in the Gospels, going out and building relationships with people who were different from him.
Yeah, I really want to echo that and sort of kind of go off of the definition that Father Jude provided us with. So, it's racism is holding these prejudiced beliefs, or even worse, taking discriminatory actions against someone because of an identity that they hold, which is not only unfair and unfounded, but exactly like how Emjali said, it shows that you think that there is something about you which is better than them. And on the topic of sin, in addition to racism being a sin, pride is also a sin, so thinking about how you put yourself as that one up to someone else is certainly very damaging. And I would agree that challenging racism is about valuing every person's humanity and their whole selves, which include every aspect of their identity. Javier, the example you described about our biases and how our brain works, it's probably natural for everyone to feel more comfortable around those who think, act, and look like you. But you're also doing yourself a terrible disservice by not learning more about others. And so, thinking about how we can sort of address racism in our communities, racism and other types of oppression occur at so many levels of our society. So starting from, kids need to be able to see that teachers, doctors, sanitation workers are all equally important. And especially with the pandemic, we've seen how every aspect and every layer and profession in our society has been really critical to us. And so, in a simple way like that, there needs to be representation of diverse races at each of these professions. So thinking about myself in the community of Catholic U, it's important to the counseling center, for example, that we're hiring staff and trainees who will be the representation that our community needs to see, so that we look like a variety of different people, that we have a variety of different ideas. And that really is like doing ourselves a favor, all of us, by having this sort of diversity of thought and values.
Awesome, thank you. Now I'm gonna go back to Father Jude, because he also shared a little bit about some of the things that we need to do. So give me 1 second. Let me cue him up here, and we'll listen, and then we'll go on to the next question.
I think confronting racism begins in our own home and in our own lives. I think so often in our culture we have been desensitized to our words, especially with social media. So things like making racist jokes or jokes against one group of people, prejudice. And we think, oh, me and my friends were going to laugh about this. But we have to remember that there is a seriousness with all of our words, and that we need to be charitable in everything we say and do. That doesn't mean we don't have fun, but not fun at the expense of others. So I think it's in our speech we start, and our thinking patterns. I think the other thing too is that people of all races and colors need to stop looking at everyone as part of a monolithic race. Each person has a name, and each person has an identity and a personality and a life experience. And in order for us to really attack racism, prejudice, bigotry, it's getting to know the other person and realizing that this person is not much different than I am, even though our life experience may be very different.
So Father Jude is talking about our own role, right? That it begins with us, change begins with us. So the last question I want to pose to both of you is, what can students do to find their voice in confronting racism? So as they're getting ready to come to campus, as they're getting ready to expand their minds through this experience of college, what can they do, to find that voice and to be agents of, this movement to confront racism? Any thoughts?
I guess I'd say, where I think there's a sense of solidarity and community is that it's not just students. So I want you to know that I personally, my family, we've had so many conversations, and I know that staff have conversations. So I think part of it is recognizing that in confronting racism, that it's going to be a communal kind of approach. And so that it's not just you as the students, but staff and faculty and the institution and the church and myself being a part of every single one of those, I think is going to be part of that solution. Sometimes it's overwhelming to think, wow, that is so big. How can I, one person, be a part of that? And so I would have to echo what Father Jude said of starting in your home. So starting in your home with your new roommate, maybe starting in your home with the floor or your suite that you are with, or literally starting in your home with your parents or your siblings or your extended family. Those are the hardest conversations to have. And I think that's why it is even more important. It's easier to spout out the words and to share your opinion with the stranger because you don't know them. You're not tied to them, but to the people of your family and to the people you live with, I think that's harder. And so for me, and what I would recommend is to kind of journey back into what was my own privilege, recognize where do I come from, what were my experiences, and then the other part is to listen. So listen to people who are different from me. So I've made intentional reach outs to different people to say, can you share with me your experience? Because I haven't had some of those experiences so that I can help understand a different perspective. And so I'd say start having conversations, open, honest conversations with people in your own home. Start to listen to people who are different. And if you don't have the opportunity because you tend to be with the same kind of people, be courageous enough to reach out to someone or to a group to say, I don't know you. Would you be open to this conversation? Take advantage of the opportunities that will happen when you return to engage in those conversations and to listen. And then personally, I'm doing lots of reading, watching movies, which I think movies really we're really blessed to have all these free kind of movies and Netflix and all kinds of stuff. And so my family and I are kind of watching those as well to educate myself, as well as to help understand what's happening. So conversations, listen, and learn.
I also really liked Father Jude's point that, you know, to not see ourselves as a monolith. So the answer to racism isn't a colorblind approach that we're all exactly the same. We all have unique strengths, talents, perspectives, and right now we're all in a space of higher education. So all the more we value chances at expanding our views. And so seeing how we encourage international students, exchange trips, semesters abroad, service trips, all of these come with the expectation and hope that whether people are coming to the US or our students are going elsewhere, that you're learning from each other. And I mean, again, thinking about the layers and the ways that we kind of progress how we're learning, I just wanted to revisit the point of making jokes with one another can feel like a very normalizing way to realize that one group has the power to make fun of another. And that's part of why oppression is so hard to destabilize, right? Because I think oftentimes one group doesn't want to give up power for another. But if we actually realize that as a society, that power does not have to be one over another. It isn't scarce, it isn't limited. And frankly, we are far more powerful when we are uplifting other voices and communities.
Ladies, thank you very much. You've just been a refreshing voice, and I really appreciate all your thoughts. Now we're gonna ask our students to move on to the next part of this and engage with the activities that we have prepared following this video. So thank you again for helping us break open this conversation. And for all our students, I hope when you come to campus, you have an opportunity to talk to these wonderful ladies and colleagues who have a lot of wisdom. And we're ready to walk with you in this process of becoming a better person. So we're not coming to university just to grow, in academically, but we want to become better persons. So that's the goal. Again, thank you very much, and we'll see you around.